While you're doing the primary quest, you have to go to the glowing seas to find a man named Virgil. You find him in a cave hiding deep within the glowing seas. He is a super mutant wearing an Institute lab coat, interestingly enough. You find out that he's a former Institute scientist who has exiled himself to the glowing seas. He escaped from the Institute by injecting himself with a virus that turned him into a super mutant. This allowed him to retreat to the glowing seas, where he can live out his life without fear of dying from radiation. Now that he's free, he wants the cure that will turn him back into a human. And so he sends you to the Institute to find his former laboratory, the FEV lab. You find the FEV lab by entering the Bioscience division. Explore through the back hallways until you find a door that's locked with a novice lock. Once through, you will fight your way through a myriad of defenses to get to the FEV lab. Inside, you see two big glass tubes with floating super mutants, and one that has been broken. What went on here? It's unlike any other lab in the Institute. All of the other labs have this more modern, sci-fi white walls. This lab looks much older. It's got your typical steel/bunker looking factory interior like you would find anywhere else in the Commonwealth. To start, let's listen to the 3 short holotapes that you find in this lab.
This is Dr. Elliot with the official report for the Directorate from Bioscience. The date is, August 2178. I'm pleased to report that, as has been the case during my tenure, crop yields exceed expectations. In point of fact, everything down here is fine, with one notable exception. Dr. Frederick has informed me that the Directorate has pre-approved research on samples of the FEV virus, which he already has in his possession. Now, I'm not one to question the Directorate, you all know that. I don't even want to know where this came from, but, well, this is troubling. Dangerous, possibly. I will do my best to make sure risks are minimized, but I really do hope that the consequences are understood. This is Dr. Elliot reporting for the Bioscience Division, March 22-24. We just received another batch of subjects, but as my previous report stated, we're at an impasse here. More of the same won't help. The 2 most promising strains of FEV have been adapted to an ideal state, but we're still missing something. I am officially echoing the team's position. The most likely progress for our research on synthetic organics requires new avenues of exploration. Additional Commonwealth subjects will not help. It's the same problem across the board, exposure to too much radiation. We need someone new. There's a proposal we'll be putting forward. I am not entirely comfortable with it, but it seems the best course.
Personal record, Dr. Brian Virgil. This will likely be my last recording. My requests to shut down the FEV program have repeatedly been denied. We've learned nothing useful in the last 10 years. Why does Father insist on continuing it? If he won't see reason, then I have to take matters into my own hands. What we're doing, it's not right. It needs to stop. If anyone should find this after I'm gone, know that I never wanted to hurt anyone. Anyone. Do you understand me? I'm gonna make sure the whole program is shut down. If not for good, then at least for years to come. After that, I know what I'm about to do will be seen as a betrayal. Treason, he'll probably call it. So, I'm leaving. I have a plan, and if it works, I'll be somewhere safe. Somewhere not even the coursers can find me. Everything that we've done, the lives we've taken. If there is a God, may he have mercy on us all.
Now, when doing my research for this video, I came across a variety of different theories for what went on here. The first was that the Institute was actually manufacturing supermutants, much like they manufacture synths. This would explain why we've got supermutants hanging in these big jars. According to this theory, the Institute is the source of the supermutants you find in the Commonwealth, because if you check out the terminal in the FEV lab, you find a list of recent subjects along with their condition. Most of these are listed as either deceased or terminated. Only a few have the status discarded. That could mean that they were either killed or that they were released to the Commonwealth. My bet is that they were released to the Commonwealth because on one of them it actually says tagged and discarded, which means that they were tracking that supermutant. This means that the Institute alone is directly responsible for the outbreak of supermutants in the Commonwealth over the past 109 years. Forget kidnapping Commonwealth citizens and experimenting on them. How many lives are the Institute responsible for ending simply due to the outbreak of supermutants that they alone are responsible for? In Dr. Elliott's holotape from 2224, he mentions that he just had another shipment of subjects, and he says the word subjects in a way that makes it sound like he's rather uncomfortable with what he's doing. This project started in the year 2178 with Dr. Elliott. Until that time, according to his holotape, his team was focusing on crop yields. His holotape makes it clear that he's uncomfortable with what his new role will be, which will be doing research on the FEV virus. The Institute obtained samples of the FEV virus. In his next holotape, recorded in the year 2224, 46 years after the research began, we learned that they're using the FEV virus samples on human subjects. And not just any human subjects, these are human subjects from the Commonwealth. That's the point of his holotape. He's complaining at the quality of the samples that he's been given. He's complaining at the quality of human beings he's given to subject to the FEV virus. We learn from the terminal that after Dr. Elliott died, he was replaced by Dr. Siverson as head of the project. It wasn't until 2286 that Virgil, the very Virgil that we met in the cave, was appointed the leader of Project Synthesis. Now, another theory about the purpose of this lab is that the Institute was experimenting on human subjects trying to find a cure for the FEV virus. This would make sense because Virgil sends you to the Institute to get his cure. However, it's not true. Once you give the cure back to Virgil and he uses it, he tells you that the cure is not going to have any immediate benefit to the world because what he produced was a cure for a unique strain of the FEV virus.
This is a qualified success?
There were some side effects to the process. I seem to have hair again, and I've retained some muscle mass. The genetic resequencer needs more work. Still, I take your point. This is a significant advance, but only for one strain of FEV. It will take years, perhaps decades, to generalize my formula. Still, you have my gratitude.
We already know that the Institute has been experimenting with the FEV virus for over 100 years, and since then they have likely produced a variety of unique strains that don't exist in the wild. They only exist in the Institute. This was the kind of strain that he was subjected to, which turned him into a supermutant and for which he created a cure. Thus, any cure he made would only work on him. It wouldn't work on any of the supermutants out in the wild. It would be much more cheaper and take a lot less time to just send all supermutants to the Vim Pop bottling factory. Apparently, Vim has properties that can cure the FEV virus. I explored those topics in my video on the Vim factory, which you can find here. No, what Virgil did is he wanted to escape the Institute, and so he subjected himself to a unique strain of FEV that he knew he could cure. The unique strain made him stronger, which allowed him to escape the Institute, and it made him immune to radiation, allowing him to hide out in the glowing sea. This incident, the escape of Virgil, is actually referenced in the terminal in the FEV lab, and it's referred to as Incident V. The terminal references the two supermutant bodies you find floating in the tanks. One was a male in his mid-30s who accidentally died during Virgil's escape, and the other was a female in her early 30s, also unintentionally terminated during Virgil's escape. The broken tube is likely the tube that Virgil used to dunk himself in when subjecting himself to the FEV virus. Once he became a supermutant, he broke free of the tube and escaped. So if the Institute wasn't looking for a cure, well then what were they doing here? Well, the key is in the name of the project that was taking place here, Project Synthesis. When you synthesize something, you are combining different things to cause a reaction that forms a new thing. In Virgil's log entry made on 2286, he says, synthetic organics continue to perform well. The necessity of future tests is unexplained. Synthetic organics, the Gen 3 synth program. His next journal entry, made almost a year later, on February 10th, 2287, makes this plain as day. Virgil says that he entered a formal complaint with the Directorate. He contends that these tests are not bringing in any valuable information and that the Organics project was spun off decades ago, making him wonder why they continue to round up people from the Commonwealth and experiment on them with FEV. Before the Institute decided to use the DNA from the sole survivor's son, they thought that they could make a new race of superhuman Institute beings by experimenting with the FEV virus. This is why Dr. Elliot, in his holotape from 2224, says that the experiments aren't producing anything valuable because all of the Commonwealth citizens that they've been kidnapping have already been exposed to too much radiation. It's Dr. Elliot's team that put forward the proposal, which he admits that he did not feel comfortable with, to enter Vault 111 and kidnap your son. That act is a direct result of Dr. Elliot's failure experimenting on kidnapped people from the Commonwealth in hopes of producing the next generation of superhuman synthetic being. This also helps explain the holding cells that you find in the corridors outside the FEV lab. In some of the cells we find dead supermutants, dead cats, and children's toys. They were subjecting people to the FEV virus, turning them into supermutants, locking them in a closed room with children's toys and a cat to see what they would do. Would they kill the cat? Would they eat the cat? This might also explain what happens to all of the kidnapped Commonwealth citizens who have been replaced by synths. What happened to the original Roger Warwick? What happened to the original Mayor McDonough? They likely met their end here in the FEV lab. They were likely dunked in these tanks, turned into supermutants, observed, and in the clinical terms used by the Institute that we find in the terminal, terminated. Or tagged and discarded. How horrible is it to think that the supermutant you meet on the street, that you have to kill to survive, at one time had been your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, your neighbor, your friend, or your lover. But they didn't just experiment on Commonwealth citizens. They even experimented on their own. You're all familiar with the supermutant behemoth named Swan at Swan's Pond. But if you go to his little shack after killing him, you learn that his original name was Edgar Swan. There are 4 notes in Swan's shack that tell us a little bit about where he came from. In the first note, we learn that he was punished for stealing cigarettes. He refers to they. They'll bring me food and water. They agreed to a probation. His punishment for stealing cigarettes is to sit in a cell and write something every day. But who is they? We'll learn in his next note, day 6, that whoever they were testing on him. Every bone in his body aches. He's on edge all of the time. His mind is racing. What did they do to me? Who do we know that experiments on people? In his third note, day 14, we find a much more eloquent Edgar Swan. He's using larger words that he's never used before in any of his notes. It's here that we learn that he was subjected to, quote, a particular strain of modified FEV. Their goals were to improve neural efficiency, to improve muscle mass. It's here that we learn that he applied to join the research team, and he's awaiting the director's approval. The director of what? The director of the Institute. They subjected one of their own scientists, who did nothing more than steal a few cigarettes, to FEV. We learn in Swan's final note, on day 21, that it all falls apart. Seizures continue. He's ordered back to the observation lab for further study. His prognosis is poor. The viral strain he was infected with was unstable. His mental capacity is starting to deteriorate. And then he ponders, will they reject me like all the others? Before they can reject him, Swan somehow escapes. Maybe the same way Virgil escaped many years later. In fact, if you go back to Virgil and you tell him that you couldn't find the cure, the two of you can actually have a conversation about Swan.
Do you remember Edgar Swan?
Swan. Yes, I saw his file. He was one of our first test subjects, years ago. His mutations destabilized, started turning into a behemoth. You think that could happen to me? Maybe I'm fine for a few months, a few years, but... God, I couldn't live like that.
Then end it now. Well, you can still make that choice.
I don't think I can. I don't have the stomach to kill myself. But you could do it. Go ahead. Just try to make it quick, all right? All right.
Of course he remembers Edgar Swan. He's heard the stories. It happened at the Institute. Even after they were successful with Sean's DNA in creating Generation 3 synths, they continued with the FEV program. Virgil couldn't stand it any longer. Maybe he could excuse what they were doing if they were actually achieving results. But it had been over 100 years since the program began. Virgil himself had been working on it for over 10 years. He's clearly haunted by what he's done. He talks about all of the lives he's taken, and if there's a God, that he has mercy. He feels so bad about it that you can exploit his guilt. You have an option to rub what he's done in his face.
How many people did you infect with FEV for your research, You only got what you deserved.
What? How can you say that? After everything I've done for you?
It's no wonder that if you do, he attacks you. So now that we've organized all the moving parts, let's paint a picture for what went on in the FEV laboratory. In 2178, the director of the Institute has Dr. Elliot start the FEV program. Dr. Elliot has reservations, but he does his best to make sure that the risks are minimized. He doubts that his superiors understand the consequences of what they're about to do. 46 years later, in 2224, Dr. Elliot and his team admit failure and are the first to propose the idea that the Institute kidnap a child that has not been subjected to radiation to continue with the Gen 3 synth program. Over the next 100 years, the Institute routinely goes out into the Commonwealth and kidnaps people to be used as subjects for Project Synthesis. 53 years later, in July of 2277, we learn that Dr. Siverson is now in charge of this program, which has continued to go on despite the Gen 3 synth project being spun off. 9 years later, Dr. Virgil is placed in charge of the program after Siverson's death, but he's not pleased with the position because he doesn't understand exactly what they're doing. The synthetic organics program is already doing well. There's no need for them to be continuing to round up Commonwealth citizens and kill them with FEV experimentations. 2287, almost 1 year later, Dr. Virgil lodges a formal complaint with the Directorate. Shortly thereafter, Dr. Virgil creates a plan to escape the Institute. He refines a strain of the FEV and produces a cure just for that strain. He subjects himself to the strain to become superhuman and immune to radiation. Somehow he escapes the Institute, possibly through the sewer exit, but he forgets the cure in the lab, possibly due to his diminishing mental capacity. In the tumult of his escape, the two subjects in the tanks die, and the entire program is shut down. In so doing, Dr. Brian Virgil effectively ends a failed experiment that has cost countless human lives that's been going on for 109 years. That is the full story of the FEV lab. So what did you think of this story? Did you learn something about the lab that you didn't otherwise know? This video is part of the research that I'm doing into the Institute in preparation for a big video on the Institute. So stay tuned for that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I read all of the comments you leave on my videos. They give me great ideas for future videos, so please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. If you like this video and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers gain access to my private Discord server as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But as always, more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so very glad that you're watching. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning with a brand new video.